Hi, my name is Mike Ross. I'm from Lawrence, Kansas in the USA. Thanks for watching this video. And today I'm going to discuss the concept behind dynamic processors and also describe threshold, ratio, attack, and release. But first, let's talk about what dynamic range is. Simply put, it's the range between the loudest and quietest part of the mix. Dynamic range can be increased by making the loud sound louder or by making the quiet sound quieter. Dynamic range can be decreased by making the loudest parts quieter or making the quietest parts louder. Dynamic processors do the following. They alter the range and volume between the loudest and softest sound on a recording or amplified musical performance. This is called your dynamic range. They are used to keep the listener focused on the key part of the mix by bringing out the subtle nuances of the parts. There are four main types of dynamic processors: compressors, limiters, gates, and expanders. Compressors and limiters are designed to turn the loudest part of a signal down. A compressor is almost always used on vocals, bass, instruments, anything with a wide dynamic range. There are three main functions that compressors and limiters perform. They can protect against loud sounds that can overdrive and cause unwanted distortion. They even out sounds in the mix that tend to constantly change volume. They increase the overall volume of the sounds that we want in the mix, thus improving the signal-to-noise ratio. There are four controls that are common to all compressors and limiters: threshold, attack time, release time, and ratio. Threshold. The threshold sets the volume level at which the compressor will begin to recognize the signal. Once the signal surpasses this level, its fade is determined by the settings of the other three dials. Therefore, only sounds above a certain level are altered. Attack time. The attack time controls the amount of time that it takes for a compressor to turn down a signal once it's past that threshold. An attack time that is set too fast will turn down the transients, causing certain important elements of the sound to be lost. One that is too slow will end up allowing unwanted sounds through. Release time. The release time sets the amount of time it takes for the compressor to let go or turn the signal back up once it falls below the threshold. Longer release times tend to produce the smoothest and most natural results. And ratio is the amount the volume should change in relation to the input level. For example, a 2-to-1 ratio in a compressor means that for every 2 decibels of input, only 1 decibel will go through the output. Ratios greater than 10-to-1 in a compressor are said to be limiting. What's the difference between a limiter and a compressor? Both basically perform the same function, but the limiter is a much more extreme compressor. It has the ability to compress the signal much greater than the compressor, and thus it's limiting. This graph represents a signal with a huge energy peak. We'd use a limiter on this kind of signal so the majority of the sound is unaffected. Expanders work in a similar way to compressors, except that they act on the signal that is below a set threshold instead of above a threshold. Expanders are used to expand the dynamic range of a piece of music. Compressors make loud songs softer. Expanders make soft sounds louder. If you look at this graph, you'll notice that anything above the threshold is unaffected by the gate expander. Gates. A gate is an extreme version of an expander. They are most often used to eliminate noise in a track. Gates allow you to set a threshold that is just above the noise floor. Any sound below the threshold will be silent. Expanders are a little more effective because they allow for sounds to fade out a little more naturally. Gates sometimes cause fading out sounds to get clipped prematurely. Dynamic processors are a very powerful tool in the studio. Used correctly, they will lead to clean, slick, smooth, and professional recordings. When used improperly, they can lead to airy and noisy recordings. Learning to properly use a dynamic processor is one of the most important skills in the studio in live sound mixing. Again, my name is Mike Ross. I'm from Lawrence, Kansas in the USA. My source for most of this information is from our instructor, Loudon Stearns, and from Wikipedia and other sources on the internet.